Hello. Good evening. My name's John Parker, Chief Exec at the Arboricultural Association here in the UK, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Wednesday webinar sponsored by Steel. Thank you, Steel. Please say hello in the chat, select everyone when you do so, and use the Q&A button if you have any questions. Before handing over to tonight's speaker, Jeremy Barrell, I wanted to encourage you all to sign up to our webinar next week. Heather Craddock will be giving a fascinating talk about the ackee tree in Jamaica, often considered to be the national tree and principal botanical symbol of Jamaican identity. Groves of ackee trees can act as botanical markers of former slave villages and sites of cultural memory. So, drawing on representation of ackee in art and literature, Heather will uncover the cultural history of a tree grown beyond the colonial spaces of the plantation and botanic garden. And in the same webinar, Maria Chiara Pastore will be talking about phytoremediation. For those of you unfamiliar with that term, it's a method of using trees and other plants to clean up contaminated soil, water, and air. This has, of course, obvious applications for the urban forest in our towns and cities, and Maria will be telling us about her experiences in Milan. So please do sign up for that one now. It's free of charge, of course. Get your CUs and your CPD points and whatnot, and we'd love to see you next week. And finally, my now regular reminder that if you'd like to support the work of the association, please do consider becoming a member. We can't do all of this stuff without our membership, so please do get involved and support our work. So on to the main event for this evening. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back several times now, but this is always a welcome guest to the webinar Wednesday. You think I know how to say this by now? They'll edit that out at the end. Anyway, welcome back to the stage, Jeremy Barrell. Jeremy, it is over to you.
Hi, John. Thanks very much. I'll try not to be quite as garbled as that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time, your personal time, to attend this webinar. And although I think everybody appreciates the work that John and Andrew and the rest of the AA team put in and the support that we get from Steel, actually, it wouldn't be a success if it wasn't for all the delegates that we get. And I can see we're on 630 in at the moment, which is a great result. So thanks to you all. I really appreciate it, and we value your individual support. Now, this is the fourth one that I've done of John's several, and I can remember I had the privilege of being involved in the first one when John and I were discussing it and what we were going to do, and that was with Nicholas Spence and Tony Kirkham from Q and me as well. And we weren't sure if it was going to be a success or if it would work. And what we did is I think in the end we got maybe 160. I can't remember, John, but it was maybe 160 delegates or attendees, which we thought was quite successful. And that was a good start. And it's actually gone from strength to strength. And now we're on probably, I think this is the 87th webinar from that start, which is staggering. And to have 500, 600 people attending from 45 countries around the world is just staggering. So thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And it's really, it's great to see so many people here. Now, I think most professions, acting as an expert witness is seen as the pinnacle of professional practice. But it's a funny old game because you don't really start off thinking, oh, I want to be an expert witness when I was chucking wood on a fire, burning brushwood. We didn't have chippers in those days. But what happens is that you actually have to be invited. You have to be invited to act as an expert witness by the financiers of most of the cases that occur, and they're primarily insurance companies. And you only get invited if you have a reputation and you've proved yourself as being credible from that point of view. So few people are ever asked. And only the very best get to the top and survive and stay there. And that's because it's a fairly harsh environment to survive in. we're up against, when we're in court, we don't go to court that often, but when we're in court, we're up against some of the brightest minds that exist in the world there in terms of cross-examining barristers. And but you make one mistake and they'll have you and your reputation will be in tatters. So it's a high risk occupation. Now, I've been involved in more cases involving tree failures that have caused harm than any other consultant in the UK. And it's that depth of unique experience I'm going to bring to the presentation today, and hopefully give you a few pointers if you if you're thinking of having a go at it yourself. Anyway, if you just give me a few seconds, because I'm going to just try and share the screen, and then we can start looking at the images. And I think, yeah, that looks fine to me. Right, good. I've got the thumbs up there, which is a good start. So I love lateral thinking, thinking outside the box and doing something different. And this is just a great example of the practicalities of that. As it's from Gothenburg in Sweden from 6 years ago now. But the depth of awareness that this shows beyond just trees, but the importance of trees in the environment. And somebody here, the easiest thing in to do with this tree would have been to fell it, and somebody took the risk and decided to keep it on the basis that everybody knows now, it's widely accepted that trees are good for people. We need more of them, but this demonstrates a depth of understanding that goes beyond just that simpleness. The importance that trees, the value that trees can have even when they're dead and still standing, and all of the ecosystem that they support. And it's going to be one of the themes that runs through what I'm going to say today. Healthy ecosystems equals healthy people. And 2 weeks ago, we had Jim Mulholland give us a fantastic webinar on bats. So look at that in the archive if you get a chance. But this is habitat for bats, but also birds. We've got woodpeckers, we've got owls that can nest in bigger cavities, we've got tree creepers, we've got nuthatches, we've got blue tits, great tits, all of those birds. This is a food resource for them and habitat and shelter. And that's what keeps these places alive and good to go to. So ecology is hugely important, and it's easy to lose that when you sit in the really, I suppose, rather sanitized environment in courtrooms and in your nice comfortable office. But this stuff really matters. So that's I think something that I was really impressed to see. Someone decided to keep those trees, or that tree, in a very original way. And I don't know if they may even be on this call. So if they are, pop it into the chat and tell us who you are. And I just think you need to take the acclaim, not me. But a great effort and something that's really glad to see. And sadly, something that we're not seeing in the management of our urban environments as much as we should do. So it's something that we need to see more of. Anyway, so today I'm going to be talking to you. It's called Tree Risk Management on an alternative perspective, looking at things from a slightly different perspective, and I'll explain that as I go through. And one of the difficulties that I've got today is that I've only got 40, 50 minutes left now, and I've got to try and get a lot of information across to you, and I want you to have as much as possible. So instead of going into the detail, I'll give you a quick overview, but instead of going into the detail, then I've prepared a list of references that you can access. You can go onto our website and download this, and you can go straight to the links. There's 40 odd references in it. And also, I think Andrew's going to put it in the chat, which means that you can access it directly. So that will be hopefully a resource for you. A lot of this information isn't widely available. It's taken me years to put it together, and I think it's a great thing to share. So I hope you find it useful and use it. So going back to the beginning, anyway, the beginning of civil cases relating to tree failures, Paul and Bartholomew, many of you may have heard of it. When I was involved in it, I was acting for the claimant, a motorcyclist called Gary Paul, and Dr. Delgro Callahan was acting for the defendants in this instance. And it was Mr. Pole was riding along the road, and a stem from this ash tree that we can see there were four stems. One was dead when I was there, which was in 2004. The accident happened in 2001. One of the stems not there now, fell off and caused him serious injury. And a claim was made against Viscount Asquith, Viscount Morley, Asquith of Morley, and Mr. Bartholomew was his name, and that's the name of the court case. It's an interesting case because when you get closer to the tree, you can see that actually it's a coppice stump, it's an ash tree, and it had multiple stems, and some of those stems had included bark unions. And my position was, I mean, the defense was that, well, we've had a forestry consultant check the trees. He drives past, and if he sees any signs of ill health, then he deals with it. And my position was, well, health is quite rightly something that you look for when you're trying to manage risk, but also there are structural conditions which don't manifest themselves in the crown or what the tree looks like, and included bark unions at the base of coppice stumps are something that you should be particularly cautious about. And so that was the scenario there. And in the end, the court found that absolutely right. If someone had just walked up to the base of that tree instead of driving past, they would have seen the included bark unions that we can see there where the stem pulled out from. And they would have known that there was something that could have been done about it. And I was really quite thrilled about being involved in this because I'd been an expert witness before, but in 1995, I sold my contracting business and just did consultancy. And I was doing subsidence cases. So I've been to court, the High Court, 3 times and doing subsidence cases and also personal injuries at work. But this was the first tree failure case that I did, and I was very excited. I was very pleased. I hadn't done one before, and of course, it was fantastic to win because up until that point, I'd had 4 losses in cases, and it doesn't matter how good you are when you have continual failures. Not necessarily because it's your fault, but it demoralizes you, and you tend to, it definitely gets you down. So to have a win or a success was very positive from my point of view. But one of the things, the reason why I was a baptism of fire is because let me just go back on. I hadn't understood how many armchair commentators there were out there. People who'd never been to court before, people who have never seen the site, and yet they read the paperwork that's published at the judgment, which is just one small part of a much bigger documentary pile, and they start spouting on about what's right and what's wrong. And it was quite interesting because the venom and the vitriol that was spat at me took me by surprise. I hadn't quite realized what it was going to be like. And there were let me go back again. There were comments like, well, this is a nonsense because, Barrell's saying that every multiple stem tree in a hedgerow needs to be checked quite carefully. Well, I wasn't saying that actually. I was saying coppice trees with multiple stems need to be checked carefully, and that still stands today because there's always a risk with a coppice stump that you're going to have included bark unions. And if you're doing the job properly, then you need to go and have a look at that. And it was easy to look at. All you had to do was walk over to it, and yet they didn't bother to do it. And Mr. Pole suffered severe injuries because of it. On the bright side, that was a bit of a shock, but on the bright side, it stimulated. Neville Fay did a great job of coordinating a whole range of stakeholders and producing common sense risk management trees, the National Tree Safety Group, an excellent effort, something that stands out in the world. I wasn't completely in agreement with all the content, but what happened was over the last 3 or 4 years now. That was published in 2011, at the end of 2011. And the latest version, which has been 4 or 5 years now in the making, has just been published a few months ago. And that's on the list as well. But you really want to have a look at that because it's an outstanding document. It really is a world-class reference that applies all over the world. and something that I'm very proud of. Of course, there will be bits that I'm not enthusiastic about or don't entirely agree with, but really it's something that we should all be very proud of here in the UK. And it's fantastic thanks to Neville and the team and a whole range of people as well. But Neville sits there at the head of it, and well done for doing that. Now, this is where we see whether the technology works okay, because from one poll to another poll, and Andrew's just put it up on the screen there. This is something for you to do now, and for you to do something. So have a look at it. If you're, are you a person that's involved in managing tree risk at work? And the answer is yes or no. And have you ever appeared in court in any legal proceedings relating to trees? And it's to give just a bit of fun, really, but it's to get some engagement as well. And while you're just having time to fill in that, I can see that we now have this quite good, this new Zoom. You can, as a speaker, you can see how many delegates there are, which is pretty good. So we've got 715 at the moment. So I'm pretty happy about that. Thank you so much. I just hope that what I'm going to come up with, in fact, I've got some stuff that hardly anyone will have seen because it literally only happened 2 or 3 days ago, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. Anyway, so that looks 80% of our delegates here are. I'm going to read it out because when it's recorded, it actually the results aren't can't be seen very easily. So 80% are saying yes, they do deal with trees, so fantastic. And 20% say no. And have you ever appeared in court in legal proceedings? And 88 people say that they have. That's 17%, and 83 say they haven't. So that's interesting, and I think it reflects, it gives you an indication. Thanks, Andrew. That can go now, I think, and we can get back to the presentation. But I think that confirms. Let me just see if I can get back onto. Yeah, I think we have. Let me just see if I can get rid of. That's it. Right, it's gone from my screen anyway. I didn't fill it in. Well, that's probably not very good, is it? I didn't even take part in my own poll. Right. But this is another case here, and you can read about it in the references, but it's Kavanagh and Whitney Parish Council. This was one that I wasn't successful with. I had advocated a 3-year inspection frequency for a roadside lime tree that fell and hurt seriously Mr. Kavanagh, the bus driver here, was an appropriate time frame, and Dr. O'Callaghan Delga argued on the other side that it should have been less, and the judge went for that. So a 1.5 to 2 year inspection frequency for trees in that type of scenario is now the norm. So that's just one of the cases that I was involved in to give you an idea of it. Let me just get my cursor so that it starts to work. Right. So just a quick overview with that as a backdrop. I want to give you there's a lot of people from overseas here, and I will ask another poll later on to see how many people actually there are. But I want to give just a quick overview of the legal framework in the UK so that we can see what I'm talking about. There's a lot of confusion, anxiety, and clarifications that would be useful, and I hope that I'm going to have time in the 40 minutes or so that I've got left to try and shed some light on those. And where are areas when we go and look at trees that we should be more concerned, not panic, but be more concerned and have a heightened awareness of what may be going on. And finally, questions. I want to make sure that we do have some time for questions. And I need to say, John, that I had some after my last book recommendation. I had quite a few people get hold of me saying thanks very much for such an excellent recommendation. So and that means it's been quite difficult to match it this time, but I've got something better. So I think it's going to be a real showstopper. It's obviously the last question of the whole thing. So it may be worth hanging on and seeing what my recommendation this time is going to be. So that's what we plan to do. Now, just as a quick overview, and we have lots of people with different levels of skill here, but where we sit, especially for our overseas visitors and guests, it's Probably pretty similar in most places, but I'll just give you a quick overview here. This is our Supreme Court. It's in London. It's opposite the Houses of Parliament. So you've got Parliament Square, or the Palace of Westminster, and you've got Parliament Square. And then this is on the far side of it. And it's a lovely building, and worth going to look at just for the architecture. But this is where all of the top disputes are settled, and really worth going to have a look at if you get a chance. And so just this is a simplistic overview, so please forgive me if it's not perfect, but excuse me, it just gives us an idea of where we are. On the left-hand side is criminal cases, and on the right are civil cases. And for the low-value criminal cases, the magistrate usually deals with that, so traffic offences, small fines, and stuff like that. And the more serious crimes, we go to Crown Court, and there can be a judge and a jury in that environment. And then where there's disputes or legal arguments, that can go to the Court of Appeal, and then finally to the one we have in the image there, the Supreme Court, which is the final arbiter in the UK now that we're out of the European Union. And excuse me. So that's sort of how the criminal system works, and the civil system, which is where there's some dispute, and somebody says you did something wrong, and we want compensation for the harm that arose. They start in the county court, and it's just a bit higher than the magistrates' court, and then that's for the low value cases, and the higher value cases go to the High Court, and that's in London, and we'll see some images of that in a second. And then again, the High Court then for disputes can go to the Court of Appeal and to the Supreme Court. And then sitting sort of in parallel with this, and possibly just below it a little bit, are inquests as well. And they're sort of not quite the same as civil judgments because they're inquisitorial, but they do provide some very, very useful pointers on what a reasonable standard of care is going to be. So I'm going to mention a few of those, and we'll look at them and sort of try and decide, see what we can pull out of them. So, but the ones that I'm primarily concerned about are not really these lower value cases here, but the higher value ones that are criminal over here, civil here, and that go to the Court of Appeal. And none in the recent history have been to the Supreme Court yet. So that's why that one's not highlighted. Just to look at civil cases first, and it's just a quick overview, but this is just a wonderful, wonderful building. And if you're into architecture, it's huge. It's got more than 1,000. It was opened by Queen Victoria in 1882, and it has over 1,000 rooms in it, and it has 88 courts in it, and it's just got like something massive, like 3 miles of corridors. So it's interesting, and I'm just going to try and see. But at the top there, let me just see if I can put the image. But I'm going to just put it on there because this is magnifying it here, and this is a bit of tree interest here. So if you can see my pointer, these are dawn redwoods, so Metasequoia glyptostroboides. So you go up there and you have a look, and Paul Akers planted these. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately. He was a great, great tree officer in London, and he left a legacy. Isn't that fantastic that I can talk about that now as people are looking at this aerial view? And those demonstrate that what a great tree for streets Metasequoia is, and it really is doing well there. So well worth, if you get a chance, to go and have a look at that, and we'll go back into the wider view. So that's what the Royal Courts of Justice look like at the overview, and this is the main entrance here that we see in the main cases that get onto TV, and that we see in most of the promotional material. And that's where all the action happens with the press when a big legal case has come out and there's a decision on it. So that's where you go into. And then this is what you see when you're inside. And it's quite spectacular. This is a function, so it's the only image I could get. But usually that's empty. But there are corridors. It's like a maze when you go in there, and it's just awe-inspiring and overwhelming. And there we can see at the end, and that's the entrance. That's what we saw in the previous image. And that's where the X-ray scanners are. And I used to do personal injury cases, and one of those cases, it was the first time I went to the High Court, I actually took a chainsaw in with me, so I probably it didn't have a bar on it. I had the bar with me, and it didn't have a chain though. And they did look at it, but they let me take it in. And the whole point was that in the court, I put the bar on. I didn't put the chain on. It would have been quite interesting to start it. I didn't do that, but it was quite an interesting experience. So you can go in here. The public can go in here. It's well worth having a look at. It's really spectacular, and it's a great part of our English heritage. But more to the point here. There's been 15 written judgments in the last 20 years, and I know that there are at least three others that have either there's not been a written judgment. Judges can give verbal judgments, and then there's no written judgment. And also, certainly two cases that I know of, which I was involved in, were settled before there was a judgment. So there's probably about 20 in this 20-year period, and it's worth looking at them because they're the names of the cases. And also on the right-hand column, you can see the experts involved, and that is the only experts that I'm aware of, and I may have missed one or two. Not experts, but cases. So please forgive me if it's not complete. But you can see that there's just not many people do this stuff. And when you look at it, and there's quite a few people there that have done three cases or more. And Colin Bashford sits in there, Delbro Callahan, David Lonsdale, bless him, had done three as well. And then Dr. Frank Hope has done quite a few. But other than that, it's interesting just from a UK perspective who those people are, but there are not many of them. And that's why it's so specialist. And then if we just move on to criminal cases, so that's the right-hand side of that separation that I made, and it's a slightly different court. It's not the civil case. It's the Old Bailey, effectively the Central Criminal Court. And this is really interesting here, and I've put this table up because it is a summary, and you can find links to all of these cases in the reference list, so you don't need to worry about taking things down. But basically, there's been seven criminal prosecutions, successful prosecutions by HSE or by prosecuting authority since 2002. And what's really interesting, and I'll just show this to you, is the first one was in Birmingham, where three people were killed. And then between 2002 and 2020, there had only been two prosecutions. But guess what? From 2020 to 2024, there's actually been five successful prosecutions. And there are other prosecutions which some instances haven't been successful. And I've been involved in all of those. And you can see that the sums are quite substantial, and they are effectively local authorities who haven't checked their trees properly, don't have an effective regime in place, or corporations like Bupa and the wildlife park. But what's really interesting is those five cases in the last 4 years. And you know what that means? That means HSE are taking this seriously. They are prosecuting authorities where they don't have a satisfactory or defensible regime in place. And I think local authorities need to be very, very careful about this. And just the last one there, literally that result was only 3 days ago, that criminal prosecution, which was 500,000 fine plus 7,000, just over 7,000 for expenses or for costs. So that's really interesting. And that means that local authorities really do need to get their act together, because HSE is prosecuting, and in a big way. That's one a year, excuse me. And something to think about anyway. So and then we go to the final area where we can get judgments from coroners' inquests, from coroners' courts. And I can't spend a lot of time on this, but coroners can issue a prevention of future death certificate. It's a PFD report, and what that means is a mechanism for coroners alerting relevant authorities, agencies, that change is needed. And it's usually changes to highway layouts and things like that where deaths have occurred. But there's been three relating to trees that I'm aware of. There may have been more, but I've only seen three. And I've been involved in all of those three. And they sit there. And from 2014, that inquest had a lot of influence and impact on how highway trees should be checked. And the last one was Lucia Jane Steele, which was an unborn child that died in 2019. That prevention of future death certificate was issued. So it's worth having a look at those. They sit there as important and references, and they give us a steer into what the courts are likely to expect. So that's just a rough background. And what I wanted to do was just go through, because quite a few people aren't aware of all the options that can happen. Just go through what happens when a tree failure causes harm. This one's in Richmond Park in 2003, where a young boy was killed. And the first thing that hurdle or problem that you have is, if you're a duty holder, is the police. They're interested. They will look at it where a death's occurred, certainly, and see if whether there's grounds for corporate manslaughter charges to be brought. And there have been no tree cases where that has happened, but it doesn't mean to say that it won't happen, because I see gross negligence quite often, or what seems to be, so I think it's going to come at some stage. So we'll wait and see. At the same time, in parallel, HSE are interested in these cases to see whether there's been a breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act. And that basically means that you don't have a system in place for checking the trees, and that's what they'll be looking for. And if there has been a death, then there will be an inquest, not always, but a lot of times there'll be an inquest. And that is not an adversarial where forum where one side is fighting against the other. It's inquisitorial in a sense. It's trying to find out what happened and why someone died, and then if any, obviously from the PFD reports, if any changes can be made that might reduce those risks. And then we have the potential for a criminal prosecution. So has there been a breach of the Health and Safety at Work Act? And we'd seen those cases and instances where that has happened, and it's happening more often now. After that, or in parallel with that, if there's no criminal charges to be brought, then a civil action for damages. And what a civil action is it's one side saying, you didn't look after your trees properly. We suffered harm because of your failure to do that, and we want compensation for that. And it goes to court, and then a judge in principle decides. If that happens and a case is instigated, then you usually, not always, but you usually have experts on each side. And this is a lot of the work that I do behind the scenes, where you prepare a report and then you meet with the other experts to prepare a joint statement on what you can agree and what you can't agree. And this informs the parties and the court, and it sometimes, in many instances, it stimulates them to settle. So just to give you an overview, I deal with about 10 cases a year. One of those cases a year probably goes to court, and that could be a criminal one, or and I may attend in court or not. I don't always, and certainly inquests I don't go very often, and then so you don't get to court very often, but a lot of the work is in this background documentation. And then when you're in court, as an expert witness, you are grilled, and your reports come under minute scrutiny from these barristers who you're never, the brain power that these people have is just staggering. So I'm never going to compete on that. So how do I stand a chance? Do you give up? Well, no, because they may have the brain power and the processing power, but they don't have the experience, and that's what I do have, and that's where you have an advantage. And then once the court has heard all the evidence and the judge has decided, then you get a written judgment. Usually it can be a verbal one. Sometimes judgment spelt without an E. That's the correct way of spelling it, just in case people were wondering. And then there is the potential for appeal, and there's been 2 appeals in the last 20 years relating to tree cases, Micklewright and Kavanagh. And they were both unsuccessful in the sense of people that brought the appeal weren't successful. And then finally you have uh, the post proceedings commentary, usually by people who haven't been to court, they haven't read the documentation, they've read the judgment, and they think they can be clever and come to lots of conclusions which support their particular agenda. So that's one of the most unsavory parts of the whole process, and something that's not good. So this is that's a quick overview there, and just because I don't want to bombard you with too much information without a break. So we've got another little poll here because we know everybody's in now. I think pretty much 739 people, 740, somebody just arrived, which is brilliant. So I think that's wonderful. So thank you so much. Where do you come from? So this is to give us an idea of whether you're an overseas visitor or not, because I know this is British or UK oriented, but these principles apply around the world as well. And so hopefully you'll be able to take something away, and it'll give you a few insights. And then what's your occupation? Because it's nice to know that, isn't it? You can't see now, and on these days, now you can't see who's on the call and what they do and all that sort of stuff. So this gives a little bit of an insight. So I'm going to read it again so that it's available for the archive recording. And oh, that's brilliant. That's a brilliant split. So 75%, I'm not sure if you can see this, but I can, but 75% are from the UK and 25% from overseas. Now, that is a brilliant effort because, it matters that that people feel confident and feel it's worth attending. So well done for all of these overseas visitors. Fantastic to see you. Come to the UK and we'll show you around if you get hold of me. And then what's your occupation? Well, that is not many people have filled that in, so maybe it's not working very well, or maybe I can't see the whole thing very well. So uh oh, maybe. Let me just see if I can scroll it. I bet you this is because. Right, hang on. Right, that's it. Right, sorry. It's because I've got a limited view here, so I couldn't scroll. I was thinking, oh, it's only like 2% or 3%. Well, there's a lot of options in there. But let me just tell you now, the most common one is tree consultants at 46%. So there's 248 tree consultants out there. So good on you. And I look forward to seeing you all. And hopefully one day you'll be able to give me a good kicking in court, and that'll be something to look forward to, won't it? Tree contractors 25%. That's great because there's a lot of practical things here. I was a contractor at the beginning, and it's this practical experience that really makes a difference. You obviously have to put that into an academic context, but how can you, advise on tree management at this level if you don't have a very good and thorough understanding of how things work on the ground? And then we've also got tree officers. From my point of view, always the most important people within the system, and because they have such you may feel as a tree officer that you don't have a lot of power and you're constantly being criticized, but they do a great job. They look after our urban resources, and that's great to see so many of them. And then there's others there, and I don't want to spend too long going through the scrolling. Let me see. Tree enthusiast, 9%. Well, good on you for being enthusiastic. I wonder, Jim Mulholland had quite a lot of children watching his watching his presentation a couple of weeks ago. I wonder how many 6-year-olds have managed to hang out this long. Because if you're 6, and there was quite a lot of 6-year-olds watching his, then I probably bored you to tears, and I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, I should move on. So I think we can end that. Good, well done, Andrew. That's good. He's taken it off. Let me just go back and see. Yeah, that's the right. So I just want to look. Lots of emojis. Thank you. um, it's quite funny, isn't it? Yeah, I I just don't want John to be conned by someone saying I'm 6 years old and I want to ask Barrell this really awkward question. So anyway, I think one of the difficulties that we have in terms of tree risk management is that the origins it's extremely complicated, the theory, and the origins are in industrial processes where there was huge amounts of statistics and lots of operations were repeated many, many times, and there were clear records of how many people got injured. And so we had a risk management sort of technological base based on accurate and reliable data. And the difficulty that we have in the tree world is that every tree is different, every situation is different. We don't have complete data, and that makes it very difficult for us to apply the same principles, just transfer them from one environment to another and expect it to work. So there's lots of discussion, lots of different views, and that's why there are so many people that have different ways of looking at this. And none of them are going to be wrong, I'm sure, and none of them should be seen as being better than any of the others. But that's one of the reasons why we have such a lot of confusion, and we have a lot of excessive complication, I think. And it's easy to get carried away and think it needs to be more complicated, but I don't think it does. And I'm going to just set out a few pointers for you on that issue. And one of the, I mean, obviously, the difficulty I've got today is just a short period of time, and there's just no way that I can give you lots of detail. But what I wanted to do was to give you a lot of background references, and just the two most important ones from my point of view are the published papers that I've got on this, and they are in the Arboricultural Journal. I'm working on another one at the moment, but this one was 12 years ago now, and it's had 1,000 views, so not that many. But this one was open access, and it's 3 years ago now, and it's had over 6,000 views. So it's the second most accessed paper of all time, with the Cavat boys and girls leading the way at 3 times as many views as me. So that's obviously very disappointing, but I'm never going to beat them. So I just have to be quite happy with that. But there's a lot of information in this second paper, particularly, and that really is something that's worth looking at. And I really, a lot of the things that I'm going to mention today are in there, and the explanations sit there. So in terms of what do you have to do? What's an expectation of the standard of the duty of care that the courts are going to expect you to do and from two perspectives. I'm going to deal with the tree inspector in a minute, but first of all, the duty holder, the person that has the responsibility for the trees, or as they call in in Australia, the tree keepers. That's a great name, but the people who have to look after the trees and bear the responsibility. And there are a series of sort of, I suppose, takeaway points that I've pulled out from an interpretation of various references, and you can see them. First of all, the court's expectation is that any reasonably foreseeable harm that could arise is managed, and that needs to be managed in a proportionate way. It doesn't mean to say you've got to get rid of the harm completely, but it does mean that you have to have considered it and taken a balanced view on it. And one of the issues that crops up, first of all, is there enough occupancy to actually bother to even look at the tree in the first place? And this is typical. This is a site that I went to look at in Yorkshire a few years ago now. And this is one of the issues that crops up, and there is no answer to it. And this is the difficulty with a lot of this, is that we have, are there enough people here to warrant even going in and looking at the trees, let alone doing anything to them? And we don't know the answer to this. And I think what happens is when you make a decision, you take a view, you have to be able to explain it to the court. And I'm not sure what people think here, but do you think this is so remote that there's no need to go and check the trees? Because if there's no people there, or very few people, then there's going to be no significant risk of any harm, or foreseeable risk of any harm. And my view is that probably we look at things like the level of wear and tear on the tracks. There's obviously a bridge there. People are encouraged into here and able to come in here. And I think that means that probably there is a requirement to check the trees, but we'll only know if it goes to court. And a judge takes a view on it. And this is one of the interesting things is that so few cases go to court. They only deal with very small issues, and we really don't have clear information or judgments or views or opinions on a whole range of issues, like how much occupancy, how many people should use a footpath before you have to check it. Check the trees, one a day, one a week, one a year or whatever. So that's one of the challenges that we face, and it's quite difficult. The HSE SIM, and we'll look at that in a minute, but it's a sector information minute. It's the government agency, it's the government position on an expectation from a criminal context, what you need to do to not have broken the law. And that says that you should proactively, that means you go and look at it, and periodically check trees. Not all trees, but you certainly should do that if there's enough occupancy. And the other thing, which is you don't need loads of fancy equipment, and you don't need to have lots of sophisticated investigations at this stage. The starting point is a quick visual check, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. I think as a duty holder, and we will look at homeowners again in a second. But as a corporate duty holder, I think there was quite reasonably an expectation that the people that check the trees should be trained to do it and should have some training. And how often you should check them, well, that's another thing which we don't have a lot of information on, but you have to be able to defend whatever frequency that you choose. So that's for duty holders, corporate duty holders. And then in a similar vein, they can own properties, but there are also many highway authorities, and the information in the leads for this come from Middleton and Surrey County Council, which was one of the cases that was heard, and also the Michael Arthur Warren inquest and the PFD that came out of that, the Prevention of Future Deaths report. And here's just a summary quickly of it is okay to carry out driven checks, but if you do them, you must do them at a low speed. And you must have a driver, and there needs to be a spotter, and that spotter needs to be trained in identifying gross problems with trees. And they should only be looking at trees, not other highway issues like surfacing and stuff like that. You can only view one side of the road at a time, because how on earth can you look one way, then the other? And, when you're looking over there, a tree over there, you've missed it because you're driving along. So this is all common sense, but you'd be staggered at what was going on and what is still going on. So none of this should be just taken for granted. It may sound simple, but it's not. And if you're going to do this, then if you see a gross defect or a trigger, and they can be a whole range of things, from a dead branch, hanging branch, a particular type of tree, then you need to stop and do a visual check. And a driven check may be good for finding gross defects, but there are problems because you cannot see behind all of the trees. And so I doubt if it's going to be defensible to do a driven check on a large network or body of trees without having a walked regime as well. And then the frequency and stuff like that remains the same as before. So that's just a quick overview of what an expected standard from a highways point of view is going to be. And then the other perspective, and it's slightly different, the same principles apply, but if you're a homeowner, how does that differ from your responsibilities if you're a corporate duty holder? And one of the cases here, you can see it in the bottom panel, but it's reference 12 in the document, is Stagecoach and South Western Trains and Hind and Steel. And the judge then came to a view. Miss Hind had checked this tree. It was an ash tree. A branch fell off and hit a train, or a train ran into it and caused substantial damage, not a branch, a stem. And there was severe decay at the base, but the whole thing at the time was covered in ivy, and there were brambles all around the front here. And so Miss Hind she was a gardener. She was able to identify problems with trees and poor signs of poor health, but there was no expectation that she beats her way through the brambles and pulls the ivy off of a trunk when the tree looks reasonably healthy. So that was pretty clear, and I think that still stands understands and will be one of the standard references. So that's from a quick run through duty holders, but also there's tree inspectors. And one of, so the likes of us, we do this as well. So I'm not sitting here talking from an academic point of view. We do tens of thousands of trees a year that we look at, and I'm out a lot of days myself looking at them as well. So are you going to be criticized when you're in court because you haven't done you haven't used sophisticated investigation equipment, you haven't used a proprietary method of looking at trees? Are you going to be vulnerable to criticism because you didn't do that and you hadn't spent lots of money on training? Well, the answer is I don't think so. And if you step back from all of the complication and try and look at what we're really trying to do here, here's just a quick overview, if you're a tree inspector, of the types of things that you should be thinking about and what you should be able to explain to a court if a tree that you've checked then fails and causes harm. And as the same as before, a quick visual check is the starting point. There is no expectation that you do detailed investigations unless there is some visible indicator that you need to look at things a bit more carefully. So that's the starting point. And you need to look at the tree if you can from a distance or accessible points and look at it close up. And this is in Mumbai. It's just a staggeringly busy place. And how do you check a tree like that? Well, this is the process that you need to go through. And your job as a tree assessing whether there's a risk or whether you need to manage this tree is to say, is the branch or is the whole tree going to fall off? Yes or no. It's as simple as that. If you don't think it's going to fall off between now and the next inspection, you don't have to do anything. Go on to the next tree. If you think it is, then you have to start thinking about what to do. And if a branch or the tree is going to fail, if it's going to fall into a field or into a hedge or whatever, and there's no occupancy there, you don't really need to do anything, do you? But if it's going to fall into a street or onto buildings, then perhaps you do need to do something. So will a failure cause harm? That's something that's critically important to think about. And if it will, then you specify the works to reduce significant risks. You don't have to get rid of the risk completely, but you certainly need to reduce them. And this is all about intelligent analysis. And that means that you look at the circumstances, and we'll just talk a bit more in a second about that. But that relies on experience and knowledge. And this is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Because if you don't have any experience, are you going to be able to do this job properly? And the answer is probably not. So how do you get around that? Well, I haven't got time to talk about that now, but if you ask me a few questions in the question time, then I can talk to you a bit more about that. But we check literally tens of thousands of trees a year, and we found a way around these difficulties. And I'm happy to share that with you if people want to hear more about that. So in a little bit more, that's an overview, a little bit more about how do you actually decide if a branch is going to fall off or the tree's going to fall over? Well, first of all, you need to know the checking frequency. So are you going to be here, how long is it going to be before you're back to look at the tree again? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and then you have to make judgments based on that. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it's in the documentation that you can find. But there are a series of failure factors, things that affect trees and will make them fail. And I don't want to spend lots of time going through it, but it sits there and you can look at it again if you need to browse it. But your task as an assessor, taking an overview, is to try and weigh up all of these particular issues and then come to a view on whether you think within that inspection period, before it's going to be checked again, is something going to fall off, and should we be doing something about it? And if your answer is yes, then you assess what the threat's going to be, and then you specify remedial works. This is all stuff that's been out there for a long time, and it's what you use to look after yourself. So just a few cases. This one is Micklewright and Surrey County Council, and this is about conditions in a tree that are hidden, that can't be discovered. And unfortunately, the branch, and we can see it there, broke off when a person called Mr. Emerson was parked in this car park here with his son going out for a bike ride. The branch fell off, and unfortunately, he suffered fatal injuries. And his partner Ms. Micklewright, brought the case. And the council, and this was Surrey County Council, didn't have a checking regime for this tree. And so they were found that they'd neglected, they hadn't met the duty of care, and then but did liability for the harm sit with them? So they'd broken the law, they didn't do what they should have done, and that was found. But actually, the judge found that when on balance, that when we looked at, and this is a section of the branch that came off, there was decay in the center of the branch, and you can see it here. But there was no evidence of that from an external check, and it wouldn't have been possible to discover it. So although they'd broken the law, they'd been negligent in the way they'd managed the tree, they weren't held liable for the consequences, because even if the tree had been checked, it's unlikely that something would have been discovered and action would have prevented the failure. So that case that's Heathrow Airport there. It's London here. That's Heathrow. Windsor is around there, and that case was in Windsor. The second case that we're going to talk about is Atkins and Scott, and that's in Hampshire here. Just so this is on the south of England for our guests from overseas. And this is the oak tree here. It's by the side of the A32, which is a fairly busy road, about 6 meters from it, and so that's the tree there. And you can see that there is the branch that fell off. There's some of the remnants, and that's what it looked like inside. And you can see again some internal decay. And one of the things, the characteristic about this was the expert on the other side. I was acting for Sir James Scott, who was the defendant. The expert on the other side quite rightly pointed out that there was a crack in this tree here, which we knew it was a historic crack because there's woundwood growth around the edge of it and weathering as well. So it's obviously been there quite a while. But I looked at it and thought, well, this crack must have been facing upwards, or certainly not facing downwards. So how visible was it? So we persuaded the other parties to agree to putting the right bit that fell off back up on the tree, and put it together. And this is what we did. And to show where the crack was, I put a piece of chainsaw starter cord. So one of my chainsaws wouldn't start, to put it along there to show where the crack was, so that we could see that from the ground. And we put this back together, and then we looked at it again, and that's what it looked like from up the tree, not on the ground, but we're down on the ground down over here, and you can see that that was pointing upwards at around about 45 to 60 degrees upwards. And so that crack, there's no way that would have been visible from ground level. And so, sorry, let me just go back on that, let me just go back there. And so it was found that even if well, the tree was checked, and it was quite reasonable that they hadn't been able to see this, and so nothing was done about it. And so the claimant was unsuccessful and the defendant was successful in that instance. I'm just going to finish this section now very quickly, because we're low on time, and I don't want to run into questions too much. But in the papers, you'll see that we need to be very cautious about language. In common language or common conversation, whether you check the tree or you inspect the tree doesn't really make a lot of difference. But actually, in a tree risk management, it's critically important to understand the difference between those two. The HSE SIM, which is this document here, clearly sets out a difference between a check and an inspection. A check is something that takes a matter of seconds or minutes. This isn't what they say, but this is the implication. And it's from ground level, and it can be quick. An inspection, in contrast, is a detailed investigation that can take, instead of minutes, it can take hours. And that's a very important differentiation, and that is set out more clearly in the papers. And the other thing I don't have time to discuss in any detail here, but there's a difference between high occupancy and high risk. And if we use those terms in the wrong way, it can have severe implications. And quite often we see councils and duty holders, or anybody, commentators, speaking about areas where there's lots of people, saying that that is a high risk area. It isn't a high risk area. It only becomes a high risk if there's a problem with the tree. And that combination results in the risk being high. And David Evans, in his valid work, has put some very good. If you go onto his website, he's got some very good explanations of how that works. And but it's something that we need to be aware of. So I just want to look quickly now before I finish, and I'm going to scoot through them quite quickly. But lots of images. When should we be more concerned? Be concerned? Certainly occluded wounds. There's a feeling, and a perception that when a wound is occluded, everything's okay, and it looks okay, but underneath it can be not quite right, and there can be advanced decay, and it can be quite significant. And this was something that caused the failure of the branch that resulted in the PFD report at the inquest of Michael Arthur Warren, and we can just see that there's the occluded wound there. And then if you turn the branch over, and that's what I did, then you can see that's the wound edge there. So that's the occlusion, and you can see all the advanced decay in the middle. So sometimes they can hide significant problems. This is another, this is a beach at Scotney Castle in Kent, or East Sussex. There's this doesn't mean to say you panic, but you have to be concerned when you see something like this. And in this instance, the tree's fairly sheltered, it's fairly upright, there's no big branches emanating from any of these potentially weak points, so probably not such a problem. One of the things that we don't see in the literature very often is the importance of severe imbalance or severe leans. There's nowhere for this tree to go. It's not going to grow that way. It is going to continue to grow that way. And at some point, it may well fail. And you need to not panic, but be aware that is a potential problem. And this doesn't matter where you are. This is in Sacramento. I was over there and I saw this one. I couldn't believe it. And I doubt if it's still there now. It would be interesting to go back and see. And then it doesn't always have to be a problem. This is in Mumbai again, where they've learnt to live with a lot of trees, and this tree has been pruned and it's been retainable. So, it's not the end of the world, but you just need to be cautious. Another thing I want to flag up quickly is the impact of water on root architecture. This is what you see when you see streams and rivers quite often. There are no roots. There's no buttresses down here. There's no roots underneath this flowing water or in the water. It's something to be aware of. And you quite often see it when you see trees on the edge of waterways that are blown over. And there are not broken roots under there. There's lots of fine fiber roots, but when they get to where the water is or just below it, they don't grow any further. And that's something which needs to be factored into account. And then we have ditches as well. And quite often ditches are dug on really wet soils, so clay soils that aren't very permeable, and it can mean that you get lots of surface rooting and not much rooting further down. This is a sycamore tree. And then when you start to dig in that ditch there, this is what we found is that the ditch was full of leaf mold, the tree's relatively young, and there were surface roots that had grown and become structural roots that had gone across the ditch and into the bank on the other side. So no real problem in the way that tree was secured. In contrast, just down the road, this is an older tree, it's an ash tree, and this is what we found there, is that no buttress roots on this side, so you need to look at the way the tree roots are, the pointers on where they are, and dug down the best part of a meter here, and there are no structural roots on that side there going through into the soil beyond. So this tree has no roots or no significant roots in this area here, and yet it has a severe lean over a highway. That's something to be concerned about and something that should be factored into the equation. So this may not apply to every situation, and certainly not for every type of tree, because willows and poplars certainly can grow in and underwater, but tree roots don't tend to grow underneath deep ditches very often. That's not a problem if the tree is fairly balanced and sheltered position. But when you get a tree that is severely imbalanced, and this was in the case of Hoyle and Hampshire County Council, Holmes and Power, this tree blew over and caused a fatality. And this was an excavation of the ditch there. And there were no obvious routes. This was before the court case, and this was after the court case. And further excavation there confirmed that there are no roots. And the way that you can tell as an expert, if you go in there, is you get into the ditch, you take a screwdriver, and here's my screwdriver that I use, one of the most important bits of equipment that we've got. Well, and one other thing, just our little mallet. So that's it. That's all we got. No sophisticated equipment. You don't need it for most instances. And you basically just get in the ditch. You have to get your feet dirty, and you have to push the screwdriver down into the ditch. And if there's no roots, if it's stony, it doesn't work. But quite often it's clay. So if you push it down and the screwdriver is pointy and you can push it, if it goes right down, you can find the roots quite quickly, and you can see whether they're there. It doesn't take very long. It takes 5 minutes maybe, and that is worth doing if it avoids this type of problem. And then finally, I know I'm a few minutes over, and I apologize for that, but these are important points. This is a massive black poplar. It's not the same everywhere in the world, so the trees grow differently in different places. But in the UK, I had underestimated how fast and how quickly decay can spread. So this is the tree. It's literally just down the road from me, so I've gone past it every day for like 15 years, and it's a busy road. You can see that. And one day I just couldn't believe it. I mean, how it didn't, I mean, it's massive. How it's like nearly 2 meters in diameter there, and look, you can see the bits of wood over there. How it didn't kill like loads of people, I just don't know. But anyway, somebody was really lucky, and it collapsed. And why did it collapse? Well, this is visitor came over in 2016, Dave Shrimpton. I'm not sure, you might be listening to this. He's from Sydney, or he was, I think, and he may still be there. So if you're with us, Dave, good man. And he helped me, gave me a bit of perspective here. So that's the trunk, that's the wound that came off. There's the branch that came off, say 5 to 10 years before. And looking at that, you think, wow, this tree's vigorous and it's not a problem. And it was just staggering. There's the branch wound there. It's staggering the amount of decay that was in there. And we had literally 1 or 2 inches, so 2 to 5 centimeters of solid growth around half of the stem, and that was all that was keeping it up and keeping it alive. And finally, ecology is really important. We're going to finish on where we started. You have a healthy ecosystem and you have healthy people. There's a few videos that I've done on that, plenty of other stuff that other people have done. This stuff matters. And that's why it's so disappointing when you see this type of unprofessional, uninformed management. First of all, anyone that thinks that that's a proper felling cut there, well, they just don't know what they're doing. But secondly, the lost habitat there, standing dead wood is desperate. But it's easier to fell it, isn't it? From ground level, you don't have to climb or do anything complicated, and that tends to be what happens. And Ted last week mentioned this. He showed this, and this was in 2018, so 6 years ago I was there. And Bill Cathcart had taken me, and Keith Saker and Alex Satel was over from Toronto, and this was one of these wonderful pollards, wonderful dead stumps. And Ted had said that had been dead for many, many years, and you can see why, and it's still there now. So that's the sort of stuff that we should be looking after. And then just in closing, this is RHS Wesleyan, the new building that they've got there, and when you see this sort of treatment and the retention of standing dead wood from really what are our showcase organizations, and people can see that on a daily basis, then that this is something that everybody should be doing. I see so many trees being felled unnecessarily. It just breaks your heart. When I was a contractor, I was felling them anyway, so that's probably why. But I feel really regretful now. But when you see Wisley doing stuff like this, then that matters. And just to finish it. It takes it's another poll. So good old Andrew, he's there on the administration side of things. It takes a lot of effort. I mean, it took me ages to pull all this stuff together, and in fact, the value of the resource sits in that document with all the references in it. But it took me a lot of effort to put this together. And if you don't like it, I don't want to bother. I'm not going to do it again. But 719 people are still here. So hopefully, if you don't want me to bother, then say so. But if you'd like to hear more, then maybe I'll do a fifth one. So that's me done. Thank you very much, John. Oh, and I'll just tell you what the result is. Oh, 100% say, have another go, do another one. Well, I didn't expect that because there's always spoilers in the audience, and there's always someone there that is just out to give you a good kicking. So thanks very much. You swamped them. Well done. That's excellent. It's 100%. Two people, two people. You've got to laugh.
Yes.
I know. Two people have said, don't bother, mate. Okay.
As a panelist, I wasn't able to vote myself. Otherwise, there would have been more. I was
John.
desperate to see that number go up. That was
You have to have a
brilliant,
bit of a
Jeremy.
laugh,
Thank you
don't you?
very much.
I'm gonna
Wonderful.
I'm
Absolutely
gonna stop my
wonderful.
share now, John.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you,
Right.
Jeremy. Another
Right.
fantastic webinar. We've got lots and lots and lots of questions, and we're just going to kind of work through them a little bit randomly, I guess. So,
Okay.
well, first of all, we'll start with a question from John, who said it's not a question, but an acknowledgement to Jeremy. Bravo. John says he's lucky enough to attend a course you did in Toronto in Canada about 12 years ago,
Oh,
and
brilliant.
mentions your work on the Bomber Command Memorial in
Yeah.
London. And I think the reason I'm mentioning is I think that might have been one of the first times we met Jeremy, because I was working with Transport for London at the time, and when you did that memorial.
Yeah, it was a very very fraught relationship, wasn't it, in those days? It was. It
I
was the
can't
bomber.
believe that.
I know, no. The Bomber Command Memorial is a fantastic thing, and we've got such a lot of good projects that we've worked on. But that's like development, so we're not talking about that today. But thank you, John. We are coming to. I'm going to Melbourne tomorrow, the next day, and I'll be looking at speaking in Australia, and then to New Zealand, and then to Singapore. We're just organising workshops for 2025 and 26. So we'll also be coming over to Canada as well and doing more in the US as well. So hopefully we can see some more of you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so Nick says, how did you get your first job as an expert witness?
Well, like, how do you do it? It's a great question because you can't go around and say to the insurers, yeah, I'm a great expert. Can you use me? And I think what happens is, and this does happen now, is that sometimes there's two or three or four expert witnesses on a case, and if all the top guys have been taken, then it's an opportunity for the younger up and coming ones to come through. So there are new names appearing, and it is very much luck. And I think, I mean, my first one was a legal, was an injury at work. So I was a contractor, so I understood work processes, and I then did some court cases on personal injuries that happened at work because we have to deal with that, and I obviously knew about dealing with that sort of stuff in the mid 1990s. And then also when I sold my contracting business, thank God I got rid of it, and then did consultancy. There was hardly any work around, and I had to work hard on mortgage reports, effectively, actually doing subsidence cases. And then, rather interestingly, the London Borough of Brent took me on as their expert, and I worked for them for quite a few years until I got so demoralised because judges, not because of them, but because the courts were favouring were favouring the claimants so much, and we were losing so many trees, even though trees may not have been the main problem. So yeah, it's not easy. You just have to take advantage of them when they turn up.
Brilliant, thank you. Zach has asked what level of qualifications you'd recommend for people to obtain and sort of to protect themselves as someone carrying out consultancy work.
Well, this. There's a combination of experience and qualifications, I suppose. Experience is not absolutely critical, so you can have people from landscape, from nurseries, from other parts of the sort of broader ground-based professions coming in, and they can learn and they can train and they can bring valuable insights, which maybe, I mean, I was a climber, so I understood how trees grew and how they fell apart. But I think being certainly just the experience matters. So when you're younger and you can do it, because as you get older, like I was finished by the time I was 35 as a climber. But do this stuff when you're younger if you get a chance and get out there. And then I think you do need to keep credentials aren't everything. but they are an indication of that you've achieved certain standards. So the things which really are important, I think, is to work towards becoming chartered, to work all of our consultants are chartered foresters or arboriculturists now, and also AA registered consultants. The AA register is the sort of elite list, I suppose, and to work to get onto that is a great way of improving your ability. And a lot of the work we do is in planning and not risk. So if you're a tree officer dealing with planning work, then that is just a fantastic background. In fact, all of most of my consultants were ex-tree officers, and they had that very important planning background.
So, on that sort of theme, Chris has asked, what's your opinion on the current ways in which trees are inspected, and is the training good enough? And somebody else, I should say, has mentioned, could you go through, Simon has asked about your thoughts on valid QTRA threats, etc. So
Yeah.
we could do an entire webinar on that, but generally, what's
No.
your thoughts on tree inspection at the moment?
Well, look, I think just to deal with the last part first, valid threats, QTRA, and track, which is the ISA program, they are all brilliant as background training and background they give you insights which are really helpful, but they don't provide, none of them, and there is no perfect approach, provides all the answers. And so there is no substitute for intelligent analysis of the situation that you find, because there's so many variables with trees and with the conditions and with the circumstances that the courts are interested in an assessment of the local circumstances, not a recipe-based approach that doesn't properly factor those in. So to go on all of those approaches are perfectly valid, bless him. And they are worth going to QTRA, all the rest of them. There's really good stuff to be learned from that, but they are not a substitute in the end for intelligent analysis and taking a view. They're like tools in the toolbox, and the more that you've got, the real marginal cases are difficult. How do you deal with marginal cases? Well, you sort of try different approaches. Each one is slightly different, and then you try and form a balanced view. And that, in the end, if a failure happens on a tree that you've checked, first of all, you don't want to take trees down unnecessarily, so you try and keep them. But if a tree does fail, then you'll need to explain to the court how you carried out that process. So that's what I think about valid and QTRA and track and threats. They're all worth the effort. And if you feel enthusiastic about it, that's fine. And because I dealt with the last one first, I've forgotten what the first bit was. What was it?
It was about what you think about the current sort of standard of inspections in general,
Oh,
and of the
okay.
qualifications leading up to that.
Right. Okay. Well, look, one of the anxieties that I have, and look, checking trees is not simple stuff for going out and doing tree checks and tree inspections. And we do literally tens of thousands a year. And there are some real problems in dealing with it. You have to be very careful with inspector fatigue, so tree checking fatigue, because you get towards the end of a long day, and I tell you, your concentration isn't as good as it is at the beginning. And also, if you do it by yourself, then you can make mistakes. It just happens. So we have this sort of, you call it in America buddy system, but we call them support consultants. And if somebody's going out to spend an hour on a site, whether you're not going to get fatigued from that. But if you're going out for 2 or 3 days or 5 days, then of course you're going to get fed up with it and it's going to be boring. And so we go out in pairs. And that's fantastic because that allows people without much experience to be paired up with someone with experience. And that's a fantastic way to learn. So it also is a second pair of eyes. And sometimes, no matter how good you are, you will miss things. And to have somebody else saying, well, what about this? Didn't you see that? And you think, oh, I didn't, did I? Have you looked at the back of that tree? No, oh, no, I haven't. Well, perhaps I ought to. And then blow me down. There you find a whopping great big problem. So I think there are difficulties with tree chopping, keeping the consistency. But one of the things that concerns me is the cases that I see, and I'm bound by client confidentiality, but some of the things that I see are horrifying in terms of the decisions that people have made. So I don't. There are people out there that shouldn't be doing this and can't do it, and that's shocking because the training is there, and and a lot of this is people just don't seem to care. So it concerns me, and I think there needs to be more focus put on training, and some people really need to up their game, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. We've had a few questions about extreme weather.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sabrina has asked, when you're recommending inspections less frequently than an annual inspection, do you include a caveat for extreme weather events? So sort of to go back and inspect certain trees after certain events.
Uh,
So let's do that. We'll do three quick fire questions about weather. So that one from Sabrina.
Yeah, okay, no problem. The HSE sim sets out quite clearly that there's an expectation that you do check trees after severe weather. Now, what's severe weather and how many you check and who checks them is a real tricky thing. And what you can do is, as long as you've got a regime in place that accounts for that possibility, then you can then use say you're on a highway, so you're a massive duty holder and you've got highways. You have highway inspectors going out on a regular basis. So what you can do is you can get them to, after a storm, to identify any obvious problems. The other thing that you can have is a mechanism for taking calls from the public and actually encourage the public to report things. And through those two, it has to be proportionate. You simply cannot go and check every tree that you checked before in, say, a 3 or 5 yearly check after severe weather. But there are things that you can do to minimize the risks from obvious hazards. And so that's how you can deal with that. But there's not an expectation. Well, I've answered it quickly, so I don't want to go on too long.
Thanks. And then Ian's asked as well about, do you think the increase in the frequency and the severity of extreme weather events should sort of demand an increase in the frequency of tree inspections?
Uh, well, I mean, there's a proportionality issue here, and HSE thankfully are very focused on proportionality. So there's no expectation that you have to do enough, but what is enough? And I think, as first of all, the basic inspections, I don't see, or basic checks, I don't see that frequency needs to change. But there certainly needs to be provision after severe weather, as I explained just then, and that should be factored into your management regime or your management program. And that doesn't mean re-inspecting every tree, but it certainly means looking carefully or more cautiously for potential hazards that are obvious, and then anything that's not quite so obvious can be picked up later.
Yeah. And Roman's asked, I think, quite an interesting question about, given the growing frequency of extreme weather events, should they now be seen as foreseeable in legal terms? So obviously, when we used to have these extreme weather events, one in a
Yeah.
1,000-year storm or whatever, but we know they're happening more regularly. Now, Bill said in the chat, there's been 12 named storms this year. Are
Yeah.
they becoming more foreseeable in this context?
I think, I mean, they have lots of storms in Florida and regular hurricanes there, and they have much higher winds than we have. I think that there's not. I think all that you can do is you can identify potential problems and weaknesses with trees that are going to be an obvious problem, and you need to deal with those. And beyond that, for branches breaking off and trees blowing over in extreme weather events, I mean, I just don't think that you can factor that in to the equation. Otherwise, you'd be almost pruning and reducing the crowns of nearly every big tree out there, and that certainly would be an overreaction. So I think there has to be some balance in taking a view, and things are moving, and we have to take a view. And also, as we get further insights from the rare court cases that do crop up, then that will hopefully inform us and allow us to make better decisions on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. No more weather questions. Matt Wells. Hi, Matt. Hope you're well. Matt has said, what's your view on insurance companies' involvement in tree care? We're seeing more and more requests for pruning and removals based on the fact that the insurance company is threatening to cancel the insurance policy if the tree isn't pruned or removed. So he's saying it's overzealous risk management, which is leading the tree management rather than anything to do with the health of the tree. What's your thoughts on the insurance sector's role in tree management like that now?
Well, Matt's in Santa Monica, or he was. I don't know. He moves around quite a bit, and you know, that's an American problem, I think, and it doesn't seem to be too much of a problem over here. I haven't really seen tree losses from that, from insurance companies insisting on removals because a tree might fail in a storm. That seems to be nonsense, but you know, it may come. But what we do have is, in fact, and TDAG have got a webinar next week on the 20th, I think, where we are going to be discussing trees being lost for a range of reasons, including specifically subsidence, and so trees are being lost by insurance companies, you know, greenwashing actually. But you can see more about that from a subsidence point of view at that webinar. But I don't think it's happening. I don't see it happening. And there may be people that have experienced it, but it hasn't happened in my experience. And if it has, then we would need to deal with it.
Someone said, why can't they see the questions that are being asked? I don't know. It's a Zoom thing. Don't blame me. I'm just the messenger.
Zoom's like a dark art. Every time I open it, first of all, there's an update, and then secondly, you share your screen and suddenly you disappear. So I'm extremely grateful that I can still see it.
No, as on his turn up and talk rubbish and then leave again. So I don't know what's happening. Okay, so our penultimate question, which hopefully we might even get a little bit of positive ending, I reckon. Neville says, hi Neville, by the way. Neville says, thanks for the presentation and for the positive support of the NTSG publication, which is absolutely fantastic. And the Arboricultural Association were involved, I would say. Neville's asking, do you think that the extremely low annual fatality risk from trees is an indication that we're assessing and managing the public safety from our nation's trees well? Does the low fatality rate mean that actually we're doing a pretty good job?
Well, I think that, you know, we're probably doing all right, but I can tell you a lot of the cases that I deal with, it would have been easy to pick up the problem. And the difficulty that we have with the legal system at the moment is that if a duty holder is on the wrong side of things, i.e. they haven't done what they should have done, then they can just settle with the claimant. And guess what? Nobody ever finds out about the dirty washing in the background there. So there's plenty of scope for primarily for large duty holders to be doing a better job. And that's not excessive, it's not unreasonable, but what some of them are doing is just horrific. The standard of what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing out there, and I see the worst instances of it, is pretty bad. Not everyone, and there's some fantastic people out there, and some people are doing it right, but there's plenty of scope for improvement. So I think, you know, I think it needs to be proportionate all the way through. There has to be balance. And I think, you know, very small tweaks to the way some of these large duty holders are managing their resource, their tree resource, could actually see a significant reduction in some of these fatalities specifically. And, you know, I mean, it's easy to say, this is not a criticism, but it's easy to say, well, there's only 6 deaths a year from tree failures. But, you know, it's just dreadful every time one happens, it's too much. So I think we can do better. It doesn't have to be disproportionate. And I think, you know, we shouldn't be sitting back and thinking we got everything under control, because I can tell you there's some really bad stuff going on out there.
Thank you. Well, you know, the point of webinars like this and the point of documents like NTSG is to try and raise those standards and share that information. So hopefully we've done a bit of good stuff there today. There is 1 minute left. We'll probably need a little bit more than that, but it's fine because we've still got like 600, more than 600 people watching. Imagine that. So our final question we'll go for, Jeremy. I don't know what he's got up his sleeve, but he's got something.
It's not going to be the show.
What's your current favourite tree-related book?
Right. Okay. Well, look, this is I had, it was a high standard to meet last time, and so many people were grateful for what I'd done, and I've really got a showstopper this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off my green screen, and I'm just going to see if I can pull the book off of my library there. And here it is. Here it
That's
is.
terrible. I can't believe you've just done that.
Oh, no, honestly, it's fantastic. No, this is the manual for the latest steel chainsaw, and it's in 5 languages. It's in German, obviously, because it's steel. It's in English, it's in Italian, French, and Dutch. I mean, 5 languages. It's just a hell of a read. No, and I haven't finished because this is the finale, all right? There's one other thing. And there's bound to be loads of criticism for this. But this is the baby, all right? This is the electric one. This is the most powerful electric chainsaw, and Husqvarna may kill me because I always used Husqvarnas, but this is just a fantastic saw. I mean, it doesn't vibrate, so I've got white finger. God, it hurts when it's cold. And this is just a wonderful, wonderful saw. It's as powerful as a petrol saw, no vibration, no fumes, and no noise. It's wonderful. So all I can do is say thank you to Steel for a fantastic saw. I hope people aren't too offended. And I told you this was going to be a showstopper, so it's probably time for me to go.
I'm worried that Steel are sponsoring you more than they're sponsoring us for these webinars.
Well, I paid for it. I bought it. So there's no, I'm not getting any financial gain out of it, but it is, honestly, I can tell you it's a great saw. And it is really a gripping read. If you get a chance, then just get it and have a look at it. It's a fantastic saw.
Endorsed by Jeremy Barrell. And all joking apart with chainsaws, sometimes people do go, oh, but it's about cutting down trees. Saws are a critical part of the arborist workshop, I was going to say, but tool bag. It's a tool that is used for tree maintenance, so they're not always bad.
No.
Good. Well, thank you, Jeremy. You've brought an object. That's the first object I think we've had as a favourite tree-related book. So you've done well there. Fantastic talk as ever.
Good. Thank you.
Sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, nothing much. It's just wonderful. It's great. So it's seen so many people. There's still nearly 600 on the thing. So thanks very much. And I hope it's okay. The problem I've got now is how am I going to match that next time? I don't know.
I don't know, and whatever. 98% of people want to hear you again, so that the pressure is.
I know it's a bit of a problem, isn't it? I'm just getting too old.
We look forward to the next series. Jeremy, thank you so much. Thank you to Andrew working behind the scenes as well. Thank you to all of you watching. Thank you to Steel, of course. I think you've had more than enough product placement for one evening. And I hope we're going to see you all next week. We'll send all of the questions to Jeremy as always. I should have said that before. We got far too many questions that we could ask, so we'll send them to Jeremy. He can have a little look through. I'm sure the certificates will be sorted out in some magical way by Andrew, so don't ask me questions about that. Thank you all very much. Hopefully see you next week to learn all about the ackee tree and phytoremediation. And with that, I will bid you all a good night. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.